So, we finished our previous lecture with a note that nature is governed by rules of quantum physics, which are very different from the rules of classical physics which we generally learn in schools. So, we took an example of nuclear fusion in the core of the sun, and we saw that if we use conservation of energy as understood and interpreted using Newton's laws of equation, no fusion should take place inside this sun's core. But fortunately, the nature is governed by quantum physics rules and the fusion takes place. Now, to understand conduction in solids and especially semiconductors, we do need these quantum physics rules, because the behavior of electrons in that solid, that is governed by quantum physics rules. When I say classical physics rules do not work, I never mean that they are wrong or they are useless or of no utility, because still all our motion of planets around the sun we can analyze using those classical physics rules. We can correctly predict when eclipse will take place, and many things, our rainfall, raindrops, how raindrops are coming, wind flowing. We construct our roads, we construct our buildings, river line, many things, all kinds of swings which are put in the parks. They all use classical physics equations and they work very well. It's only that the domain in which we are working that decides whether we can use classical physics equations or not. If we are using in small length scales like nanometers or angstroms or femtometers, picometers, the particles or the objects that we are discussing, they are tiny, like an atom or an ion, a nucleus, like that. There we are forced to use quantum physics laws, and even then they are not mutually exclusive, because quantum physics rules, if you take proper limit of a larger microscopic, not microscopic but larger length scale and all that, tend to, or they limit to those classical physics rules. So, in a way you can say that classical physics is a part of quantum physics when the length scales are large, but if length scales are small, then you have to go for that quantum thing. And therefore, I will give some introduction of quantum physics which will be necessary for our course. And hydrogen atom and spectrum of hydrogen atom, that has played an important role in development of this quantum mechanics, quantum physics. All this was in the first 2 decades or so of 20th century. So, the year 1900 to 1925, let us say, that was the period where people, great minds developed all these theories, and all these theories, remember, they were developed because the experiments dictated that something has to be done. Classical physics is not working well in certain domains. So, let us start with spectrum. What is a spectrum? And then I will talk of a spectrum of hydrogen atom. So, as you know, white light, for example, you say that it is composed of 7 colors, and if you put a prism to disperse this light, you get all these colors separated. A very common figure in the textbooks is that you have a prism, and prism is shown on the board by a triangle, and then if white light comes and falls on one face, then it goes through the prism and it comes out of the prism, and we say that it is separated in different colors. This is the kind of figure very common. So, one side is the 7 lines people actually draw, because they say that there are 7 colors. This side is red, this side is violet, and then you have that vibgyor and all those things. So, this is a very, very common figure. White light coming through the prism, going through the prism, separates in different colors. So, let me show this separation of colors through a prism through an experiment, and then we will proceed from here. Right. So, here I have a torch, and we have put a slit here so that extra divergence can be cut off. So, this is a normal torch. I have a bulb inside, filament bulb, and the batteries are there. So, when I switch it on, that bulb glows and sends light. I have a lens. This is a convex lens, just to make all these this light coming from the source somewhat parallel, and so that is this. And the third thing is this prism. So, I will be putting the prism here, I will putting this lens here and the torch here, and then I will put this torch on. Light will go from the torch to this lens, and then through this lens it will come out, and then it will fall on this prism, and from the other surface of the prism it will come out and fall on this screen. And on this screen we would expect that dispersion will take place, and this light will split into its component colors. So, let us do that. We will be putting off the light so that you will be able to see this tiny, less intense beam from this torch and the spectrum. So, now you can see on this screen, on the left you have red, you can easily see that red, and then you go towards right, and I can see yellow very clearly, and there is some green also, and at the end I can see some blue. So, at least these colors, that red and yellow and green and blue, they are visible in this. It is a continuous variation. In this band, nowhere you have dark things, some color, some light is falling in this band, and we say it is a continuous spectrum. So, white light spectrum is a continuous spectrum. You have all the wavelengths, all the colors going from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer, if it is white light, are there. I am not able to see the violet. There are many reasons. One is that violet intensity is low as compared to yellow and green in white light, and then this is torch light. Remember, the light from sun, that white light is different from the white light from the torch. The temperature is lower here, and then the sensitivity of eye is also small for violet. So, barring those things, the essential idea is that a white light from torch filament or from sun consists of wavelengths continuously varying from one end to other end. Other wavelengths are also there, but the visible wavelengths are from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometers. So, this kind of figure of 7 lines is not a good figure. It is all continuous. It should be like this. But if you take hydrogen as the source, light coming from hydrogen, here we had heated the filament of this torch bulb, or radiation from sun that comes, light from sun that comes is because of the hot surface of the sun. Now, if we heat hydrogen, or the better way is to take this hydrogen in some tube and at low pressure. So, put hydrogen in this at low pressure, put some electrodes here at the ends and apply some voltage How much voltage? Something like 5 kilovolt. This becomes a discharge tube, hydrogen discharge tube, and then it emits light. And that light that comes from this hydrogen discharge tube, that if you let it go through a prism and then on the other side you collect, you really get 4 different spots. It's not like this continuous, not like the one which you saw in our experiment. You have a light here, and then there is a dark region, then you have a light here, then you have a light here, and then you have a light here. 4 distinct wavelengths are coming. So, this wavelength is 656.3 nanometers. Then the second one is 486.1, this one 486.1 nanometer. And then the third one is 434.1 nanometer, and the fourth one is 410.2 nanometers. And this was measured way back in some 1880 or something like that, late 19th century. And these 4 wavelengths, discrete 4 wavelengths, was a puzzle, that why hydrogen emits only these 4 wavelengths in visible region. And the person who gave some kind of a relationship between these 4 numbers was a school teacher, a mathematics school teacher in some municipal school named Balmer. Okay, Johann Balmer. And it is said that on one day he was he told one of his friends that I don't have any work, and what do I do? And this physics friend gave him these numbers, that can you find some relationship between these numbers? And this person did find a relationship in this. Okay, and what was that? First thing he did was that he wrote these numbers. In fact, the numbers were in angstroms. In those days, angstrom was more in use as compared to nanometer. So, 1 nanometer is 10 angstrom. So, this number is 6563 angstrom. This is 4861 angstrom, 4341 angstrom, and 4102 angstrom. So, first thing he notices as a mathematics person, that if you take out 3645, if you take out 3645.6 common, write the first number or divide by this, let us divide by this, 6543. What is this? What is this number? You can do it in your on your calculator, and this number comes out to be 9 by 5. You will get 1.8, very close to 1.8, which you can write as 9 by 5. Similarly, the second number 4861, if you write this, say 4861 divided by the same number 3645.6, how much is this? This number is very close to 4 by 3. Then the third one is 4341 divided by 3645.6, and that number is very close to 25 by 21. And the last one is 4102, and that divided by 3645.6, and that turns out to be very close to 9 by 8. So these four numbers can be written as 3645.6 into everywhere 3645.6 into 9 by 5, then 4 by 3, then 25 by 21 and 9 by 8. So these weird looking numbers, they are ratios of some simple integers. And these ratios also you can write in a slightly different fashion. This 4 by 3 you can write as 16 by 12. This is okay. And this 9 by 8 you can write as 36 over 32. And look at these four numbers. Numerator is 9, 3 square. Here numerator is 16, 4 square. Here numerator is 25, 5 square. Here the numerator is 36, 6 square. And the denominator everywhere is 4 less than the numerator. 9 minus 4 is 5, 16 minus 4 is 12, 25 minus 4 is 21 and 36 minus 4 is 32. So these four numbers you can write as m square over m square minus 4, where m is 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So the wavelengths can be written as, the four wavelengths can be written as 3645.6 multiplied by m square over m square minus 4. This is the wavelength and m is 3, 4, 5, 6. You put these values of m and you get the wavelength in angstroms. So that is the Balmer, and it's known as Balmer's formula or Balmer's expression for wavelengths and so on. So now the problem is, why these kind of wavelengths only? In classical physics, if a charge accelerates, then it radiates electromagnetic waves of certain frequencies, certain wavelengths. In our case, we are talking of hydrogen atom. So you have a proton and you have an electron, and this electron, if it doesn't move, you leave it here, it will fall into the proton. So it has to keep moving around this nucleus, and for simplicity, if I take that it is going in circular path, it is accelerated and it should continuously emit radiation. It does not, unless you put that 5 kilovolt of battery there, or you heat it at very high temperature. Unless you do that, it does not radiate any radiation. So that is one problem with classical physics, that this hydrogen atom is presenting. And then if you do make arrangements so that it emits these discrete wavelengths. This was a problem which was occupying great minds of those times, and it was Niels Bohr who came out with some kind of a suggestion, some kind of a model, how to deviate from classical physics. All right. So that is known as Bohr's model of hydrogen atom. And what is that? Number one, somewhere you have to deviate from classical physics. So number one, the electron goes in circular orbits, that is fine. Around the proton. That is anyway necessary, unless you do some kind of a closed path motion. You cannot keep this electron from falling into this proton. But the second part is very important. There are some specific radii or specific orbits in which it does not emit EM radiation. This is a very bold statement. There are certain orbits of certain radii. If the electron is going in one of those orbits, it has got a license to disobey classical physics. No radiation will come out even if it is accelerated. So that is one place where they deviate. And then how to get that specific orbits, those radii? So he makes certain assumptions and does some calculations, and finally all those assumptions are finally equivalent to saying that these specific orbits, which are also called stationary orbits, right? So in these orbits, the angular momentum of the electron about that proton when you talk of angular momentum, it has to be about a given point r cross p. So about that proton is an integral multiple of Planck's constant divided by 2 pi, and this number is written as h cross, h with a cut on this vertical line. We call it h cross or h cut. So the angular momentum should be integral multiple of this h cross. N should be 1, 2, 3 and so on. Only those orbits which satisfy this equation are those specific orbits, those special orbits, those stationary orbits in which the electron need not emit any radiation and continue in that circle, in that orbit. So this was the third major assumption or postulate in this model. And finally the fourth one, how that those four wavelengths finally come out. So that is when electron changes orbit, right? It changes orbits. So from one orbit it goes to another orbit. The energy is emitted or absorbed if it goes to higher energy orbits. The energy is emitted in the form of EM radiation. So these are called Bohr's postulates, and then how the wavelength is related to this energy is another topic. Wavelength of that electromagnetic radiation, that light which is coming out of that hydrogen discharge tube, wavelength of that light, that electromagnetic radiation, how is that connected to this energy which is the difference of energy between these two orbits. So that is another topic, we will talk about that. But with these things somehow Bohr could explain all those 4 wavelengths very accurately as far as that instruments were available there, all right, whatever grating, prism, the accuracy which was available there. So, this model explains those 4 numbers, those 4 wavelengths very accurately.